Hello and welcome to Stories and Lessons. This is Tim Winnicky with Empowered Change Counseling and Education. Thanks for joining us today, everybody. It's an exciting episode. We're now in double digits with episode 10. It means a lot to me that you all have stuck it out with me and are continuing to listen. I hope that the stories have been helpful. I know it's been helpful for me to share them, and it's given me a wonderful excuse to talk to guys like our guest today. Today we had on Jeff Silverman. He is a child and adolescence therapist out here in Colorado, and I met him probably a little over a year ago. Primarily I reached out because we were on a social networking site together, and he was another guy in the field, and I saw one of his posts, and I really loved his perspective on parent accountability, on concrete consequences, techniques, and action to take. A lot of times, therapy isn't always about action. It's more about how you're feeling and how you're thinking. But I tend to enjoy more action-oriented therapies, more things to do. And I hadn't met many people that worked with children that had that perspective. So sure enough, I reached out, we got lunch, and it's been wonderful ever since. He's one of my go-to calls for anything related to kids. I love where the conversation went today. The main reason I grabbed him was because he's a brand new father. He's got I don't know how old his son is now, but I know it's under 6 months. And I thought, man, here's this really effective child and adolescence therapist. Let's see how fatherhood's going with him. So we had a great time talking about that. He shared some wonderful stories. A main theme of the episode is how shame connects us, what masculinity can mean for us and fathers, how it's not toxic and it's needed. And it's just a good time talking to Jeff. He's a fun guy. So without further ado, let's get started. Enjoy. Hey, Jeff, welcome to the show. How's it going?
It's all right. It's all right. Been having a lot of anxiety lately.
Yeah.
Not about the show, but I guess that's just being a new dad is you have these bouts of anxiety. I had the first 3 months he was alive, he was born, horrible anxiety. It went away for about 4 or 5 months, and now it's back with a vengeance for no apparent reason. Just, got a lot of stressors on top of having a kid, and that means anxiety.
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty common for most of us with the summer lull, right? Everybody's out enjoying the sunshine, feeling pretty good, and all of a sudden clients dry up a little bit.
Yeah, well, I actually have anxiety because I have too many clients and not enough hours for them, which is a blessing. It's nice. So, well, the funny thing is, my anxiety comes on in the morning because I'm not a morning person, so I wake up to anxiety. But my wife is not an evening person, so she goes to bed with anxiety. So
At least y'all balance it out a little bit.
Yeah, we're blessed. We're blessed in that way.
There you go. Well, I mean, it sucks that you're so good at what you do that you've got a wait list. That's really rough.
I don't know if it's I think I'm good at what I do. There's not a lot of people who do what I do.
That's fair.
And then I'm a guy on top of that, so that there's not a lot of guys in the field. Doesn't make me better. It probably makes me worse than the other therapists. But if someone's got a boy or a teenage boy, then and the female therapists just don't cut it for that specific kiddo, then I get them.
Yeah. Well, talk a little bit more about what you do and why it's a little different than most folks working with kids and adolescents.
So a lot of people who work with kids specifically, I'll start with kids, they are play therapists. And so they've got the sandbox as a sand tray therapist, and then they've got, a bazillion stuffed animals and toys, and the kids come in and they just play and play and play and play. And I don't really do that. I have a ton of games and we play every time the kids come in, but I do play therapy techniques really just to take the edge off so that we're having fun. But I use my session time less for the play therapy to do its work and more for my questions and answers from my clients, my information gathering to lead to me really understanding what's going on, and then doing some psychoeducation, which, as you know, is teaching the client something. Mm-hmm. And then if I'm right and it's a good fit and the teaching is a good fit, we turn that teaching into homework. And that's my real therapeutic technique. Someone might be hypnosis or EMDR or ACT. They have their like primary tool. Well, my primary tool is homework, which means the breakthroughs I'm creating are happening between sessions, not during sessions.
Yeah.
And I'm specifically designing the homework each week to build on the previous week's successes so that I'm pushing progress. And it really is a bit of a push. I push the progress week by week, and then I can turn the clients over. I believe I turn them over a little bit faster. And the perspective I have on the clients are that, I'm building their own personal emotional intelligence, but a lot of what I'm doing is doing group dynamic stuff with the family. So like, let's say, for example, a kiddo throws a tantrum every time the parent tries to get them to do something. I figure out why they're throwing the tantrum, teach the child about the pattern that they have that we want to get rid of, and then the pattern that they want to take over, that they want to adopt, that will be much more effective, and turn that into homework. But that thing that they're doing, the homework itself, changes how they relate to the people around them. So it's very family systems oriented.
Well, and it's just that little bit of space that a therapist provides, right? It's what I tend to tell my clients too, is it's not that the people in your life aren't there for you and can't help you. It's that they're so close to it, they can't see around it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
then I think one of the reasons why we bonded up so fast when we first met was that homework idea, right? We get them for an hour a week. If they're not taking it home and doing something there, we're never going to get anywhere.
Yeah, I remember that. And you and I do very different types of homework. I think yours is more skill building using
Yeah.
shoot, I'm blanking on the name.
Usually a lot of DBT, and
DBT, yes.
then
DBT.
once they're regulated, it ends up being a lot of narrative tools.
Right, yeah. And so mine's more family systems
Yeah.
oriented.
Which
And then
makes
building.
sense. I mean, the kids have no control. It's
Right,
got to be the system.
right. Now with the teens, it's a little different. I can still do a lot of family system stuff, but at that point they're becoming more independent. So it leans, instead of it being more family systems and less intrapsychic, one's own personal psyche. With the teens, it's more one's personal psyche. And then when it is relationship building, it's not necessarily family. It might be the homework is to have them lean on friends instead, or a teacher.
Right. Kind of lean into that developmental stage where, okay, so now, yes, your parents are there, they love you, but you're also to the point where you should be developing out other support networks, peer
Right.
networks, etc.
Exactly. And I am very development based. So if a parent says, they're throwing this let's say someone calls me on the phone, they say, well, they throw tantrums. Well, the first thing I'm going to ask is, what age are they? If they say 8 years old, that's a red flag for me. They say 15-year-old, I'm worried. I'm really worried. Maybe the cops are already involved. They will get involved. But if they say 3 or 4, I say, well, this might not be a problem. Tell me more about the tantrum and what it looks like.
Right.
You know.
Well, and that's just it, right? Meeting the clients where they're at, having a little bit of background can go a long way to make the parents feel more secure. One of the things that you said to me early on that I really liked is how much you work with the parents.
Yeah. I think that some of the parents don't even like that. They like
Of
it
course
after
they
a
don't.
while because they see solutions. But I'm like, they're like, okay, so you're good. I'll see you later. And sometimes I'd say once a week, once every few weeks, a parent goes, so I'm going to run over to the store, or I'm going to drop them off and the other parent will pick them up or something. I'm like, you sit down in the waiting room. I'll come get you when it's your turn. And then you're going to come in, you're going to sit down, and then you're going to try and hijack this session. And I'm going to tell you, nope, that's not what we're doing today. And then the parents have homework too. And occasionally a kid can't do homework. My ADHD and my ADD kids really struggle to remember to do homework because of brain function. So then I basically give their homework to the parents to prompt the kid to do their homework.
Right.
So then it's within the context of the relationship. They still end up doing it, but they're learning it through the parents prompting.
Well, and it seems like a lot of the same work I do with the fathers, where there seems to be, they may not like the idea that they are ultimately responsible for their children and they have the power in the relationship to put boundaries up. But pretty quickly, it becomes an empowering ideal for them. Like, oh, wait, I can impact this. I'm not helpless with my kid. I can make them better. Because what parent doesn't want to make their kid better?
It's so interesting to hear you talk about fathers that way because, being a family counselor, I would say, between the sons, the daughters, the mothers, and the fathers, I struggle the most with the fathers. It's not a big surprise. Men run the world and men have on average a worse social emotional intelligence than the women. So the fathers, not always, but often, more often than not, are the biggest problem in the family. And I always think of it as the fathers have too much control, or too controlling, or too demanding, too authoritative, too angry, too hostile. And it sounds like you've got a perspective into the father's psyche that maybe perhaps I've been missing, which is that they don't feel like they have enough power, that they feel powerless.
Well, and that's really where I see the guys go, is they get more and more controlling the more helpless they feel.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
So the minute that, usually the way it goes is we reframe it that your kids are learning by watching. They're not learning by what you tell them.
Hmm.
So the more regulated you are, the more effective you are, the more your kids are going to emulate that.
Right. Right. It's interesting because I do family dynamics work. I have less time, not with my teenagers. With my teenagers, it's one-on-one. We get our 45 minutes to an hour.
Mhm.
But when I've got a kiddo in there, pre-adolescence, early adolescence, I'm juggling so many people. I don't have time to get into their psyche. And so I'm just giving them, this is what you're going to do this week. Just do this once and then come back next week and tell me what it's like. And the first thing I ask them when they come into session is, what was your homework? And the second question is, tell me about it. Talk to me about tell me the
Yeah.
story. And that in some ways is very limiting because I don't get to spend as much time in the psyche of the people that I'm doing therapy with. It's not one-on-one work with a father.
Right.
I've done one-on-one work with a father once in 2.5 years after I discharged his son, and he basically begged me for it. And I said, okay, because I worked with your son, I'll do one-on-one work with you, and I'm going to focus on parent coaching. And that was a really great experience. But it's nice to get this added perspective and see the humanity behind the fathers.
Yeah, man, it goes a long way. And there's just not, like you said before, there's not a lot of guys doing the work that can meet them there.
Right.
So that's why you and I do all right. How did you know you wanted to get into the work in the first place?
It's a great question. So I always worked with kids and teens, and I started when I was a freshman in high school. I wasn't working with teens when I was a teenager, but I was working with kindergartnners. I was working with second graders. And over the years, every time I got a new opportunity to do something with kids, just something different, I would take it. So I've worked with special needs. I've worked with at-risk youth. I've worked with the privileged kids. I've done K-12 subbing for years. So I've taught every subject. I did sports coaching with swimming, rock climbing, judo. I taught a lot of judo to kids, and summer camp stuff. I was
So
even
it's always been part of your life.
yeah.
And
I mean,
that's,
even goofy stuff. I mean, I was the summer camp counselor that basically did Dungeons and Dragons in the park, but instead of using dice, we had foam swords in
nice.
Boulder, Colorado.
That's a
So
good
I was
time.
always I was always a kid and teen person. I just didn't have the training, and I got to the point where I decided I needed to get out of education because I mean, no disrespect to educators, but for me, it felt like I was more of a babysitter than doing the type of education that I was really passionate about, which was helping people grow. And
Yeah.
so I was essentially in the wrong field. And at that point, I tried to figure out, how am I gonna get out of this field? And I went to the library and asked the librarian for a book to help me research careers, and she gave me the Occupational Outlook Handbook, which is published by the United States Bureau of Labor and
Yeah.
Statistics. And I researched I probably started with 11 different careers, narrowed it down to, I don't know, 3 to 5. And then from there, it was social work versus counseling. And I got into counseling programs, not social work programs. And I'm a counselor.
There you go. Well, I want to step back a little bit. So you were in ninth grade, you were a guy, and it
Yeah.
sounds like you've been into masculine things, right? Like judo, running around, whacking people with sticks and swords. Like, how does a 14-year-old kid that's a guy in that, kind of prepubescent manhood go, you know what, I'm going to go hang out with 5-year-olds. And if somebody wants to give me flack about it, like, I'm doing this.
Oh man, the way you described it is great. Before I answer that question, I want to say that when I finished college, let's see, maybe a couple years after college, I got a job my first job in Colorado was in Boulder, and I was a preschool teacher. And it wasn't like I and a co-teacher had 16 kids. It was me and 4 other teachers shared 50 kids up to 40 in one day, and the kids would change rooms. All the rooms were connected. And so you just max out how many kids could be in your room at a time, but you had to track all of these kids. And teachers would have favorite rooms. And my favorite room was wherever I could get away from the crowd, because I have ADD and I would get overstimulated. And the way to get away from the crowd was to go outside. We had this huge outside area. It wasn't like one little gym area. It was like 7 areas. It was a huge backyard for preschoolers. And I was always bringing them outside, even in the winter when it was, and I'm from New Orleans. I like the heat. Yeah. And it was freezing in Boulder. I would bring the kids outside, and they called me the outside teacher. And of course, all my co-teachers are women, and they all had this rule that we don't play pretend weapons, no pretend guns, no pretend swords. And I told the kids, you can't have pretend guns with me, but if you want a pretend sword, you can have a pretend sword, and you can even pick up a stick, a tiny stick. We didn't have any big ones, but like one of those bendy ones that just broke off the tree. And you could pretend it's a sword, but if you accidentally touch someone with that little tiny twig, you're done. You don't get a warning. You got to go inside. This is about responsibility.
Right.
And I got flack for that. But at the same time, there's a lack of, just like there's a lack of femininity in higher education to some extent, because there's too many men in the field, or traditionally have been. There's not enough guys in primary education. And so it's always been a strange thing being a guy. And the first job was actually, I was supposed to help the kindergartners log on to their computers. Now, I as you probably already know, have no skills with computers. I know people, not computers. And the kindergartners had to show me how to log on so that I could show them how to log on. So I quit that job. After an hour. But it was just the first one. And I never really quit another job from incompetence from working with children again. And the next one was teaching second graders how to read. And then it was teaching kindergartners how to swim. And then it just kept going on and on like that.
Well, so it sounds to me like it was something you enjoyed, and then it was also something you saw a lack of that masculine space in, right? Like you showed up.
I would say I discovered the lack of masculinity.
Like you landed in it and filled it.
I filled it. I found it. And you're right, but the desire was always there. And to be honest, I can remember being, I think as young as 4 years old, seeing a baby and wanting to hold it.
Yeah.
So I've always had this, people say maternal, but I would say it's not necessarily feminine, but this desire to be, to care for children. And I don't know where that comes from. And I've always enjoyed it, and I've followed it. And I don't know, I don't know if I'm one of the few guys that had it and followed it, or if I'm just one of the few guys that had it, but it's always been there for as long as I can remember.
Well, and had some space. I mean, was there ever a point where the men in your family or the men in your life pushed back on that instinct for you?
No. And you know what? I am blessed in the sense that I come from a Jewish household. Both my parents are Jewish. And, my father did the dishes because my mother cooked, and that was what was fair. And that's what he felt was fair. And there was always, he never dismissed her. We had open debates at the dinner table, not just between the two of them, but they taught us how to hold conflict respectfully with authority figures at our dinner table. I remember my brother asked for a raise, and my father said, "Okay, make your case." And he made his case, and he said, "Okay, I'll give you a raise, but you're going to have to work harder." And so there's always a sense of negotiation in the house. There's always a sense of respect. You could do whatever you wanted as long as you worked hard at it. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to work with kids, and ultimately they were fine with that, just as long as I put my heart into it.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like they not only recognized that it was something you wanted, they also put the stipulation that you work at it.
Yes. You could do it. They said you could do whatever you want in life, but you've got to work at it.
Yeah. That's great, man.
Yeah.
So with all that background, what kind of story do you think you want to bring in today?
Well, I gave it some thought, and being a therapist that works with parents, before I even had a kid, became aware of the shame and guilt and feelings of disappointment that parents constantly feel. And it's there all the time. It's in the foreground, but it's always sometimes it's in the foreground. It's always in the background. There's always this feeling of failure on the part of parents. And the only parents I've met that claim to not have it, either are in denial or there's something worse going on. I at this point think that it is somehow developmentally appropriate for a parent to experience irrational shame that will never go away.
Mm.
And as a therapist, that's a hard thing to stomach, to go, oh, this toxic shame is basically meant for all parents. And it might not even have some evolutionary purpose. Maybe it does. Maybe it's what keeps us from eating our children. But it's here to stay. And what I find is that one of the biggest mistakes parents make are usually have to do with shutting their kids down and essentially not having a feedback loop where they can't really listen to their kids, give feedback on needs not being met or being upset about the way they're being treated by their parent or being spoken to by their parent. And the parents get super angry and defensive. And the anger, I find that sometimes it's even violence is built on rage, and the rage is underneath the rage is anger, and underneath the anger is usually defensiveness.
Yeah.
And underneath that defensiveness is a whole lot of shame, a whole lot of shame. And if one can go deep enough down, they can find that the shame is really built on unrealistic expectations of oneself in response to a really, truly insane amount of love that can only be explained through evolution.
Right.
Somehow you have a child and you're just now a love machine, but most people can't walk around. I would say pretty much anyone can walk around with that much love and have realistic expectations of what to do with that love.
Yeah.
And not turn it into shame, not develop unrealistic expectations, turn it into shame, avoid their shame by getting defensive, avoid their defensiveness by getting angry and combative with their kiddos. And so I've been working with, and I actually learned this from a professor he didn't tell me about this whole cycle. All he said was when his last child was conceived, the whole 9 months of pregnancy, he was furious. And he didn't tell us why. He just floated that out into the classroom.
Yeah.
And we were like, what? Why? We knew he was a great father. And he said, I didn't want another reminder in this world of how imperfect of a father I was. And that was it. That's all he said. He floated that. And I sat with that one for probably 2 years before I finally started to see it in my clients, that they were ashamed of themselves, they felt like failures, and they were taking that out on their kids. Not to say their kids were perfect, but their kids' issues are different issues. And the parents were taking their shame out. And that in order to not take your shame out, you have to feel the shame in your own body. You have to be like, this is my shame. I'm feeling the shame. I have to separate it out from what I know is the right response, which is to say these certain things that I was taught to say in, say, a love and logic course or some sort of parenting course. But I will feel the shame in my body, much like I feel a mosquito bite and don't scratch it. The moment we're not cognizant of that mosquito bite, we notice that we scratched a big hole in it and it's bleeding. It's the same thing with shame. And so I knew this before I became a parent. So I essentially signed up for this. I was like, I'm gonna have a child in this world, and I'm gonna go from someone who is not ashamed of themselves to someone who's ashamed of themselves.
Okay.
And I'm gonna embrace that and see what I can do with that. And sure enough, oh man, the shame has been horrible, and irrationally so. I mean, sometimes it's like I'm allowing him to pull himself up to a bench. This happened this past weekend. Pull himself up to a bench. He slips and falls because he's learning how to pull himself up onto things. And he hits his head, and he cries. And because I was the one that was closer to him in physical proximity, letting him do something he's allowed to do, I felt horrible about myself. I just felt horrible. But the story I have isn't actually one of him bonking his head. It's we were on a road trip from Denver to Fairfield, Iowa, Colorado to Iowa. It's with let's see, how old was he at the time? He was probably 6 to 7 months old. And you either were the driver or you were the one constantly coddling this child in the back seat. There was no good between my wife and I. There was no, what do you want to do? Do you want to like stare at the road for 4 hours, or do you want to like constantly be on this child who doesn't know how to road trip? And it was my turn in the back seat. And he woke up from a nap. I couldn't get him to go back to sleep. Okay, so we're hanging out, and he just napped, and he had a full belly, so he seemed like he was pretty fine. I couldn't smell a dirty diaper. He's a little fussy, and I have a very joyful child. It's hard for him to be in a bad mood. I know it's such a horrible thing to have a joyful child, but I have this kid, and he's just happy all the time. So he was just like the tiniest bit fussy, and because he wasn't very fussy, I didn't really worry about it. And we went 45 minutes of me trying to entertain him and get him in a good mood with songs and books and toys and games and goofy faces, 45 minutes of me really working my butt off until finally he got to the point where there were tears in his eyes, and he almost never cries. We almost never see tears. And he's crying and wailing. And my wife's like, let me just go like 2 more exits to the rest stop. And I'm sitting there with him watching the tears roll down his face and wailing. And I just did not know what was going on. And you go back to the father thing. I felt helpless. And I felt not only helpless, but worthless. And there's the shame. Helpless because I didn't know what was going on with him. Worthless because I couldn't do anything about it. And I felt like a horrible human being. I felt like a horrible father. I felt like I was betraying him. And then I found out he had been sitting in a dirty diaper for 45 minutes and I could have changed it. And at that point, when I figured out that I was the one on baby duty and I let him sit in a diaper for 45 minutes and feel fussy about it and essentially in his own way ask me to change it and just not understood, that's when the tears flowed. This time they flowed out of my eyes. And I was crying in the back seat. And he and I were both crying together. My wife's driving, trying to find the exit to the rest stop. And not only is her baby crying, who never cries, her husband's crying. She doesn't know why.
No.
And I had no choice at that point. I had no choice to cry because I knew if I didn't cry, I shut down that shame, I would have gone to a much worse place. I either would have gone into defensiveness and anger and been snapping at my wife for the rest of the day. Maybe I would have shut it down with some depression, some mild depression, and kind of check out for a few hours and then be non-responsive to my family in a road trip across the country. I knew that either of those options weren't going to work. Shut it down wouldn't work. Become angry, defensive and angry wouldn't work. So it was cry. And I was wailing with my son in the back seat. And we got to the rest stop and we changed his diaper. And I had a little walk and went to the bathroom and came out, and my wife gave me a hug. And I told her what happened. Like, you have to tell someone, because if nobody knows what's going on the inside, you feel like you're in isolation, and that's when things get worse. So I told her. She said she understood. She gave me a hug. She asked me if I needed anything. I told her I needed another hug, a longer one, a much longer one. We had a nice big family hug, the 3 of us. My son wasn't really into it. He was like, put me down. I want to try and learn to sit up on the cement.
He's like, yeah, my diaper's fine now. I'm over it.
Yeah, my diaper's fine. Like, what are you doing? Like, he's always on the go. He's one of those kids. He's just always on the go. He doesn't want to be in someone's lap. He doesn't, But it ended up being great. It ended up being a great day. And the rest of the day was not plagued by anger or being checked out like it is for so many of us, for so many parents, but even more so men and fathers. Yeah. We're checked out and or we are big balls of rage because deep down we are overwhelmed and we feel helpless and we're just trying to figure our way through it and we don't know how, and we rely on what we have a lot of, which is control. Yeah. And I didn't do that in this story. I managed to not do it. Of course, my wife thought I was crazy in the back seat, wailing just because he's crying. But it ended up being the exact perfect thing to do.
Well, and I think that speaks to what shame is. So we talk a lot about toxic shame, but what shame is really designed for is connection. Right? I feel shame. The only way to stop feeling like this is to connect with another human being. Like you said, right? I'm going to talk to my wife about it. I'm going to share it because I know if I don't share this, it's going to get toxic.
Right.
And then I'm going to get that connection need met. I'm going to get it normalized. Like, yeah, I didn't know my kid was sitting in poop for 45 minutes.
Right.
And I don't know a single parent I've talked to where something like that hasn't happened.
Right.
I spent an hour trying to figure out what the kid needed and I couldn't, oh my God. And then it was this really innocuous thing that if I had just checked one more thing.
Right.
But that's what shame's for. Otherwise, just like you said, right? Especially as guys, we get more controlling, we get angry, we push the world away so they don't see this ugly bit of shame that we've got going on.
Right. Yeah, I think I've been ignoring the connection piece, not ignoring it. I deal with connection with all emotions. I'm a family counselor, so really the solution to every negative emotion in my mind is some form of connection. But I've been focusing with shame more on a sense of where is my accountability? What am I doing wrong? And am I actually doing something wrong? If I'm doing something wrong, how bad is it? Is it really that bad? And no matter how bad or how innocuous it is, can I make amends and try a little harder or try again and try a little differently? And so, in my case, it was easy to forgive myself once I realized that, okay, he can sometimes be a tiny bit fussy when he needs a diaper change. And so from now on, when he's a little bit fussy, I'm going to sniff that diaper really closely. And then I can forgive myself. I'm like, hey, I'm living, I'm learning. I apologized to him. Of course, he was 6 months, so he had no idea what I was saying. But it's good to get in the habit of, I tell parents, I go, look for anything you can take accountability for. If they accuse you of not coming to their parent-child activity at school and are therefore selfish, and you can't take accountability for being selfish because you're not selfish, take accountability for not going to the thing.
Yeah.
Even if you couldn't go, say, you're right, I didn't go. And I wish I could have, and I'm sorry. And I'm sorry how that impacted you. Even if you can't say, I'm sorry for being selfish. Take accountability for anything and everything you can. Because once you have that, that's the beginning of the feedback loop. That tells the child, okay, I can hold them accountable, and then they will take accountability for the thing that they think is true, which means that when they say, I'm not being selfish, then I can believe them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes with my wife, I'll tell her, I go, you know what, honestly, I didn't forget this time. I was just procrastinating and hoping that the problem would just go away. Yeah. And I'm sorry about that. And then the next time when I go, I just forgot, she believes me.
Yeah, it's funny how accountability works out, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of the key component for dealing with shame and shameful action is acceptance that it happened, how you can be accountable to the people that impacted, and what action you're going to take so it doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
And that's the only way to bring it to a connection point, right? If we always just run around to people and are like, oh, I feel ashamed of this, eventually the people get tired of rescuing us from our shame. If we don't take that next step of this happened, I did this, and here's what I'm doing now.
Right. Yeah, I call it communal accountability. Like, we are all accountable to each other. We need to be able to, not only does the other person deserve your apology, but you need them to hold you accountable. Otherwise you can't grow.
Yeah.
And so if someone telling you, like, it really frustrates me that you still don't clean the dishes without me telling you. Well, if your wife didn't tell you that, of course you're not going to start cleaning the dishes without her telling you. You need to know, you need her to stop being the crutch. So she has to tell you that she's frustrated being the crutch. So we all need each other. We need the people that love us the most to be the people that push us the most.
Right.
And I think that the irony is that the thing that makes the shame go away, that accountability, is the very thing that for most people is triggering the shame.
Yeah.
And once we learn that, when someone tries to hold you accountable, you're going to feel ashamed of yourself. And when you accept accountability, apologize, make amends, try and move forward with a commitment to do something differently, it's just going to go away. That can be like a 5-minute conversation. Yeah. And then you don't have to carry that around and have it turn into something ugly.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a little hopeful for me, man. So you're probably one of the more competent child therapists I know. And you had a kid sitting in a poopy diaper for 45 minutes. Thank God, because God knows what's going to happen when I have them. I'll be lucky if they make it, like.
Oh, dude. Well, that's the beginning. That's the beginning. You're actually, you feel ashamed of yourself because you might make a mistake that causes them to not survive in that first few months, Yeah. You're just like, please thrive. And maybe they were crying and you slept for an additional 10 seconds. You're like, oh my God. They were crying for food and they needed food and I wasn't there for them. And so, maybe it is really here to help us make sure that they do survive. Maybe we need it for the first 3 months, and then after that, it's just not that useful.
Well, I mean, I just remember all of the times my father was effective with me. And it was usually acceptance and shame.
Huh.
Like, my father's not an emotional guy. I never saw him cry until a year ago.
Oh, wow.
And what I did see him do that really made me know he cared was and I told a story about it that'll go up on this podcast at some point, but where he acknowledged that he couldn't give me what I needed at a point in my life.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful.
And if he hadn't have done that, I would have continued to try to protect him, to like nurture his shame and then be shameful about my lack of ability to do so.
Huh.
So I don't think the shame ever stops. I mean, just with my personal relationships, I had a friend just last weekend who, he's a great guy. He's a wonderful human being, and he's always there for his friends. And he reached out to everybody because he needed something.
Hmm.
And I literally didn't make it because I couldn't remember that I can order a Lyft.
Huh.
Like, I was fried. It had been a rough week and my car was in the shop, and I'm like, well, here, I can't go. And then I beat myself up about it the next day when I'm like, why the fuck didn't I think about just taking a Lyft over? Here's a guy who's been here for me.
Yeah.
And I get there, it's a whole weekend thing. So I get there on a second day and I'm like, hey man, I'm really sorry. I didn't make it. I'm here now. What can I do? And he was like, well, thanks for saying that, man. Let's jump in it. And we crushed it. Like, a bunch of us showed up. We took care of what he needed. But just that statement of, hey man, I know that I could have done this better. I'm sorry. I'm here now.
Yeah.
And I got to stop feeling bad about not being there for a friend.
Yeah.
I don't think it stops.
No.
I think the way we frame shame is a lot like how we frame masculinity right now. The idea that it consistently gets pumped into the media and the zeitgeist as toxic is bullshit.
Yeah.
It's needed.
Yeah. Everything serves a purpose.
Yeah. Men are masculine. We need that in our lives. And when we misuse it, when we let it get ahead of us, when we don't use it right, yeah, it gets toxic. But that doesn't make it evil.
Right. Yeah. I think there's an idea that certain emotions, because they're negative and complex and layered on so many other emotions, that the mere existence of them means, oh, this is bad. Like depression, anxiety, shame. These are all built on other emotions that we're struggling with. And oh, well, then we should go to those more base emotions and hang out on those. And like, yeah, if you can do that, if you can de-escalate to that point, and at the same time, I don't think, at least from my evolutionary philosophy, I don't think that there's a single emotion in the human psyche that doesn't serve a purpose.
Yeah. Well, and we got to take it as software.
Yeah.
Right? Like, our emotions are trying to get us to something we need to be doing.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's important information, and we need to listen to it and figure out, okay, what is this telling me? And it's usually a need. It's usually an unmet need. So I would imagine with shame, generally, it's a need to feel that we are doing what we need to do to help those we love.
Yeah. Yeah.
To help our family, our friends, our community, the world at large. And as long as we're helping, we won't feel ashamed, but there's going to be hiccups.
Yeah. Well, especially as men, the whole cultural identity of men is our work and how we're useful.
Oh God. Yeah. Oh God.
Right? Like, that's where it lands. The first conversation every guy has with another guy is, what do you do for a living?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So where I see shame impact most is when we're not feeling useful. And then the controlling comes in, and the anger comes in. And that there's nothing wrong with needing to feel useful.
It's so funny you say it that way. As a kid growing up, hearing about how men care about what other men do for a living, I always had this idea before I was in the workforce that they were asking about, what they were really asking for is how much money do you make, or how powerful are you? How do you compare to my insecurity? But when I ask other men what they do for work, and they tell me they repair air conditioners, or they serve our country in foreign lands, there's this idea of admiration for whatever they do. Painting houses, it doesn't matter what it is. There's this, like, if you didn't do what you do, our society would have a huge hole in it. And I know that if I couldn't find someone like you, if it wasn't exactly you, to do this job, I would have to do it, and I would do a horrible job and possibly burn my house down or mess my family up. And so you're so needed. And then when I think about how needed they are, there's a feeling of like, am I that needed? And sometimes I even, as a therapist for children and adolescents, I have days where I'm like, yeah, but if someone goes without a therapist, they can still go to sleep at night. But if the air conditioner doesn't work in the summer, that's an issue. You can't sleep at night, right? And it doesn't matter what the job is. I can always find like this, I do really good work and I really have helped people and I have those days. And there's other days where I'm like, yeah, but I'm really just like listening to people and giving them some advice, but I'm not doing the really important basic stuff like making sure toilets flush or, mail gets delivered.
Yeah, man. There's no job in the country that you can't find a way to find somebody who feels more important than you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Oh man. So what do you think the overall lesson from this whole conversation that you would, put a bow on it, man?
Put a bow on it. I think I would want to tell all parents, and especially fathers, if you're not feeling ashamed of yourself on a regular basis, you're probably acting it out and taking it out on your kids or your spouse or someone around you. And the more you can feel it and be okay with it, the less you're going to take it out on others. So it's sort of like, do you want to feel ashamed of yourself or do you want to do something shameful? So feel ashamed, don't do something shameful. That's my advice. And if feeling ashamed means crying, if it means saying horrible things to yourself in your head and being aware that they're not true, that they're likely not true, but still just, being mean to yourself, I would much rather you be mean to yourself and deal with it at that core level than have the shame escalate into defensiveness, which escalates into anger, or have it escalate from shame into denial and then being checked out in depression or being a dad who's just not around in some sort of way. Yeah, feel ashamed of yourself.
Well, the caveat I would add to that is absolutely feel the shame, acknowledge it, and then share it.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Have somebody that you can talk to and normalize. I don't care if it's a men's group, another dad, your father, your partner, whatever it is, get the shame out. Otherwise, you will. That negative talk you're having with yourself, no one can stand that forever.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think I would add, if the person responds to you by saying, oh no, everything you're doing is fine, tell them that what you're looking for isn't validation, it's empathy. Yeah. You're not looking for them to disagree with you. You're actually looking for them to relate to your experience and share their version of shame or their version of being a parent that is ashamed of themselves. Because then you feel like someone can share in the experience and you're not alone in it.
Yeah, and you're not crazy, right?
Yeah.
If I'm feeling shameful about this and everybody's telling me I shouldn't, then am I crazy?
Right.
Yeah. So how, for the listeners, how would they find more about you? Where would you want them to go?
They can find me at www.silvermanfamilycounseling.com. silvermanfamilycounseling.com. You could also just look up Jeff Silverman on Psychology Today. I don't know if I'll still have that profile in like 5 years, but if you're listening to this podcast in 2018, then I have a Psychology Today profile and you can find me there. I do therapy in Denver, specifically South Denver. Some people will travel. I'm not allowed to do therapy out of state. You're not allowed to do therapy for a client who lives in a state that you're not licensed in. And I'm only licensed in Colorado. So if you're listening to this from out of state, you're going to need to find a therapist in state. And if you have a kid, then you definitely need a therapist in state because they need to like hang out together and play some games together.
Yeah.
And Psychology Today is just great. Like just go to Psychology Today. They're like, I want to say, what percentage of therapists do you think have a Psychology Today profile?
All of them that still have space for clients.
Yes. There you go. If they are taking new clients, they're on Psychology Today.
And I guess the last thing for those clients that are going to be out of state that can't get to you, if there was one book you'd recommend a parent read, which would that be?
It doesn't have to be a book, but I would go with anything in the realm of Love and Logic. Learn about Love and Logic, capital L, Love and Logic. Take a Love and Logic course, read a Love and Logic book, find a therapist who specializes in Love and Logic parent coaching. Essentially, you want to replace if the way you're getting your kid to do what you want them to do is showing them your sadness or your anger or your frustration or your disappointment, anything like that, you want to replace that with some sort of consequence, a reasonable consequence. You spilled the milk, you have to clean it up. You spoke back to me, you can't get on your iPad tonight. And have all of those detailed out on paper that the child can understand, so they understand the consequences are static, they're relatively static. And you can do a behavior chart where they get graded every day. But that way you can actually have this chart be a metaphorical wall, or let's say a fence between the two of you. Good fences being good neighbors. These agreements about what has consequences and what those consequences are, and what has rewards and what those rewards are, allows you to replace your negative emotions and even your positive emotions as the parenting tools with consequences, positive and negative consequences. And then instead of your child's actions affecting your emotions so much, and you going on this roller coaster, which is based on this emotional roller coaster, which is based on whatever they're doing from moment to moment, then they can do whatever they want to do. And the consequences will do the parenting. And then you can feel love day after day.
Great, man. Yeah, Love and Logic is probably my biggest referral from my parents.
Yeah.
Works out. Well, thanks for coming on to me, man. It means a lot to me. I love the story and I love working with you. I'm amazed that we share the same field. It means a lot to me.
Yeah. I love hanging out too. I love getting lunch with you. That's another piece of advice. Don't isolate yourself. But I'm sure every therapist that comes on here says the same thing. Don't isolate yourself. We as humans are meant to be connected, and we live in 2018 where everything is stacked against you for connection. So you have to fight for connection.
That's been a theme.
Yeah. So I look forward to the next time we hang out, because I definitely need some more hangout time.
There we go, man. Thanks for being on. I'm going to go ahead and close out the episode.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
As promised, we had a great conversation with Jeff today. I couldn't be more thankful that he came on. I hope that in him and I sharing our stories, it helped either normalize some of the things that you might be struggling with, or at least let you avoid some of the struggles that we share. If you're looking for more information about Jeff or me or what's going on with the show, please go to www.empoweredchangece.com. All the show notes will be there. Also, if you've enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe on whatever medium you're listening on. And if you can, go ahead and leave us a review and a rating. It really helps us get the word out about these stories. And I'm going to be honest, it feels great when I get rated and lets me know that you all are enjoying the stories. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time.